My dear sisters, there are moments in life when Allah places a mirror in front of our hearts, not to shame us, but to save us. This is one of those moments. Because there is something quietly happening to many women today, something that doesn't scream, doesn't bruise the skin, but slowly erases who you are. And by the time you feel the emptiness, by the time you ask yourself, where did I go? Years may have already passed. I say this with love, with concern, and with a deep sense of responsibility, because silence at this point is not mercy. We live in a world that tells women to surrender themselves in the name of love, obedience, patience, or even faith. Control is often disguised as care, restriction is presented as protection, and slowly, subtly, a woman is taught to shrink. She learns to doubt her voice, to apologize for her needs, to measure her worth by how little space she takes. And the tragedy is not just that she suffers, but that she begins to believe this is what Allah wants from her, when in reality Allah never asked a woman to disappear to please anyone. I want you to listen not with fear, but with clarity. Because a woman who knows her value is not rebellious, she is grounded. A woman who protects her identity is not disobedient, she is amana, conscious. And before it becomes too late, before your heart hardens into survival mode instead of spiritual growth, you need to recognize the difference between surrendering to Allah and surrendering yourself to control that Allah never sanctioned. This is about saving your soul, your dignity, and the woman Allah created you to be. There is a kind of control that does not arrive loudly. It does not come with raised voices or visible chains. It enters quietly, almost politely, wrapped in words that sound familiar and even comforting. It begins with suggestions instead of commands, with concern instead of force. A woman is told it is for her own good, for her protection, for her peace, for the sake of harmony. At first, she does not resist because nothing feels dangerous yet. She adjusts, she compromises, she tells herself that patience is noble and sacrifice is rewarded. And slowly, without realizing it, she begins to speak less, choose less, and feel less like herself. Her voice is often the first thing to go. Not because she wants silence, but because speaking becomes exhausting. Every opinion is questioned, every feeling is minimized, every concern is labeled as overthinking or emotional weakness. She learns that explaining herself leads to tension, so she shortens her sentences. She learns that disagreement causes distance, so she agrees even when her heart is unsettled. Over time, silence becomes easier than honesty. And when a woman stops speaking her truth, not because she has nothing to say, but because she no longer feels safe to say it, something sacred begins to dim inside her. Control then moves into her choices. What she wears, where she goes, who she speaks to, how she spends her time, what she dreams of. Each restriction is justified on its own, so she does not notice the pattern. She is told this is how a good woman behaves, how a righteous woman proves her sincerity, how a loving woman shows commitment. She starts to measure her worth by compliance rather than consciousness. The more she gives up, the more she is praised for being easy and understanding. And she does not realize that ease for others has come at the cost of heaviness within herself. What makes this kind of control especially painful is that it is often spiritualized. Religious language is used to silence emotional needs. Verses are quoted without context, concepts are emphasized without balance, and obedience is separated from mercy. A woman is made to feel that questioning treatment is questioning faith, that setting boundaries is a sign of weak iman, that enduring emotional harm is a form of worship. And because she fears displeasing Allah more than anyone else, she stays quiet. She internalizes guilt instead of recognizing injustice. She confuses submission to Allah with submission to control, not realizing that Allah never asked her to surrender her dignity. Her emotional needs are often dismissed as secondary or excessive. She is told to be grateful instead of being heard, to make dua instead of being supported, to have sabr instead of being protected. Slowly, she stops naming her feelings. She stops trusting her instincts. She begins to believe that needing reassurance, kindness, or understanding makes her demanding or ungrateful. And when emotional neglect becomes normal, she adapts by lowering her expectations, shrinking her hopes, and numbing parts of her heart that were once alive. This gradual loss of identity does not happen overnight. It happens through repetition, through being interrupted, corrected, dismissed, and overlooked, through being loved conditionally, valued only when compliant, appreciated only when silent. A woman begins to forget who she was before she learned to manage everyone else's comfort. She forgets the confidence she once had in her thoughts, the strength she once felt in her convictions, the joy she once found in expressing herself. She becomes efficient at survival, but distant from herself. And the tragedy is not just emotional, it is spiritual. Because when a woman disconnects from her inner voice, she often disconnects from her spiritual intuition as well. She begins to doubt her discernment, even in matters of right and wrong. She second guesses her discomfort, wondering if it is a test to endure rather than a sign to reflect. She struggles to differentiate between trials that refine her and situations that diminish her. Over time, her relationship with Allah can feel strained, not because Allah is distant, but because she has been taught to associate silence and suppression with piety. Islam never demanded that a woman erase herself. The women around the Prophet I were not silent shadows. They asked questions, expressed disagreement, sought clarity, and voiced pain. They were emotionally present, intellectually engaged, and spiritually grounded. Their worth was not measured by how little they spoke or how much they endured without complaint. Their voices were heard, their concerns were taken seriously, and their dignity was protected. Any dynamic that requires a woman to disappear in order to be considered righteous is not rooted in the prophetic model. Control that destroys identity often thrives on fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being labeled difficult, fear of being alone. A woman may stay silent not because she agrees, but because she is afraid of the consequences of speaking. And fear is not a foundation Allah intended for relationships. Love in Islam is meant to bring sakina, not chronic anxiety. Leadership is meant to be rooted in responsibility, not dominance. Protection is meant to nurture growth, not restrict it. As identity fades, a woman may begin to feel invisible even to herself. She goes through the motions of life, fulfilling roles, meeting expectations, but feeling hollow inside. She may struggle to articulate what feels wrong, because nothing appears outwardly broken. From the outside, everything looks fine. But internally there is grief. Grief for the parts of herself that were slowly negotiated away. Grief for the woman she could have been if she had been allowed to grow instead of shrink. This kind of control often convinces a woman that her value lies in how much she tolerates. That endurance is the same as strength. That silence is the same as wisdom. But strength in Islam was never defined as self-erasure. Strength is clarity, integrity, and the courage to stand firmly without cruelty to oneself. A woman who honors her identity is not defying Allah, she is honoring His creation. She is acknowledging that the intellect, emotions, and voice Allah gave her are not accidental, nor are they meant to be buried. When control goes unchallenged, it teaches future generations the same pattern. Daughters learn that love requires self-denial. Sons learn that authority means unquestioned power. And the cycle continues normalized and unexamined. Breaking this cycle does not require rebellion, it requires awareness. It requires understanding that faith and fear are not the same, that obedience and oppression are not the same, that patience and passivity are not the same. A woman reclaiming her identity does not mean she becomes harsh or ungrateful. It means she becomes whole. It means she speaks with respect instead of resentment, chooses with intention instead of pressure, and sets boundaries without guilt. It means she recognizes that Allah sees her fully, not just in how much she gives, but in how truthfully she lives. And when a woman begins to honor her inner voice again, she often finds that her relationship with Allah becomes more sincere, more intimate, and more peaceful, because it is no longer filtered through fear or silence. Control that silences a woman's voice is not love. Control that erases her choices is not leadership. Control that dismisses her emotional needs is not righteousness. These patterns may be normalized, justified, and even praised, but they leave a woman disconnected from herself and from the fullness of faith Allah intended for her. And recognizing this truth is not an act of defiance, but an act of awakening, a return to the balanced mercy and dignity that Islam has always upheld for women. Preserving a woman's sense of self is not a modern idea, nor is it a foreign concept imposed on faith. It is deeply rooted in the way Allah created the human soul, with intention, balance, and honor. A woman's dignity, her boundaries, her inner clarity, and her ability to recognize her worth are not obstacles to iman, they are expressions of it. When a woman understands who she is before Allah, she does not become arrogant or rebellious. She becomes grounded. She knows where she stands, what she can give, and what she must protect, and this awareness allows her to worship with sincerity rather than fear. Many women grow up learning that self-sacrifice is the highest form of righteousness. They are praised for enduring discomfort quietly, for prioritizing everyone else's needs, for suppressing their own emotions in the name of peace. Over time, this message becomes internalized as faith. A woman begins to believe that if something hurts her deeply, she must simply endure it. If something erodes her spirit, she must make do and stay silent. If her boundaries are crossed, she must blame herself for being too sensitive. And slowly, the line between patience and self-neglect disappears. Islam never taught women to abandon themselves. Sabr was never meant to be practiced in isolation from justice, wisdom, and self-respect. True patience is rooted in trust in Allah, not in tolerating harm that Allah Himself does not condone. When a woman ignores her emotional and spiritual well-being in the name of obedience, the cost is not only emotional exhaustion but spiritual confusion. She may continue to perform acts of worship yet feel disconnected, heavy, and unseen, not realizing that part of her soul is grieving the loss of herself. A woman who preserves her identity understands that boundaries are not walls, they are lines of clarity. They define where her responsibility ends and another's begins. They allow her to give without resentment and love without fear. Without boundaries, a woman often gives until she is empty, then blames herself for feeling bitter or distant. She wonders why her heart feels hard, why her prayers feel dry, why her joy feels fragile. She does not realize that the soul cannot thrive when it is constantly overridden. Dignity in Islam is not conditional. It is not earned through silence or submission to mistreatment. It is granted by Allah simply by being human. When a woman protects her dignity, she is not elevating herself above others. She is honoring what Allah has already elevated. This protection may look like speaking up when something feels wrong, stepping back from dynamics that cause spiritual harm, or refusing to internalize guilt for needs that are legitimate. These actions are not signs of weak faith but signs of consciousness. Ignoring a woman's sense of self has consequences that often surface quietly. At first, it may look like constant fatigue, emotional numbness, or a loss of motivation. Later, it may manifest as resentment, anxiety, or a feeling of being trapped in one's own life. Spiritually, it can lead to a transactional relationship with Allah, where worship becomes a duty rather than a refuge. A woman may feel she is constantly failing, constantly falling short, because she has been taught to measure her worth by how much she suppresses rather than how truthfully she lives. When a woman is disconnected from herself, her ability to nurture others is also affected. She may continue to give, but without presence. She may continue to care, but without joy. Her relationships may survive, but they do not flourish. Islam emphasizes ihsan, excellence, in all aspects of life, and ihsan cannot grow in an environment where the soul is ignored. A woman who is spiritually and emotionally well is better able to love, to forgive, to serve, and to grow. Preserving identity also means understanding that obedience in Islam is never blind. It is rooted in knowledge, mercy, and accountability. Allah did not create women to be passive recipients of decisions that affect their lives without understanding or consent. The ability to reflect, question, and seek clarity is part of faith, not a threat to it. When women are discouraged from thinking critically or expressing discomfort, faith becomes fragile because it is built on compliance rather than conviction. Over time, neglecting one's sense of self can lead to a quiet spiritual erosion. A woman may stop making dua for herself, believing her needs are insignificant. She may stop asking Allah for joy, fulfillment, or peace, thinking she must simply endure whatever comes her way. This resignation is not humility, it is a misunderstanding of Allah's mercy. Allah invites His servants to come to Him with their pain, their confusion, their unmet needs. When a woman denies herself this permission, she carries burdens she was never meant to carry alone. Faith thrives in wholeness. A woman who knows herself, respects herself, and honors her limits is better equipped to trust Allah. She recognizes when a situation draws her closer to Him and when it distances her from her values. She understands that not every hardship is a test to endure indefinitely, and not every difficulty is a sign of virtue. Discernment is a gift, and preserving identity allows that gift to remain intact. The long-term harm of ignoring this truth is not always dramatic, but it is profound. Years can pass in emotional survival mode, where a woman functions but does not feel alive. She may wake up one day realizing that she has built a life around expectations that were never hers. The grief that comes with this realization can be overwhelming, not because she failed, but because she was never taught that her inner world mattered to Allah as much as her outward actions. Islamic history is filled with women who were firm, articulate, and self-aware. They did not equate faith with disappearance. They understood that serving Allah required presence, intention, and integrity. They knew that a woman's strength lies not in how much she can be controlled, but in how deeply she is rooted in her values. This strength was never a threat to faith, it was a reflection of it. When a woman begins to preserve her sense of self, the shift may feel uncomfortable at first. Guilt may arise, fear may surface. She may worry about being misunderstood or judged. But with time, clarity replaces confusion and peace replaces fear. Her relationship with Allah becomes more honest because it is no longer filtered through suppression. Her worship becomes more meaningful because it is offered from a place of wholeness rather than depletion. Protecting identity is not about rejecting responsibility or abandoning roles. It is about engaging with them consciously and sustainably. A woman who honors herself is not less devoted, she is more sincere. She does not pour from an empty vessel. She recognizes that Allah does not benefit from her burnout, her silence, or her suffering. What Allah loves is a heart that is alive, aware, and connected. Spiritual and emotional harm often begins when a woman is taught to distrust herself. When her intuition is dismissed, her feelings invalidated, and her boundaries ignored, she learns to override her inner signals. Over time, this disconnection becomes normalized. Reclaiming that trust is an act of healing, not rebellion. It is a return to fitra, to the natural state of balance that Allah created within her. A woman preserving her identity is ultimately preserving her ability to worship Allah with depth and sincerity. She is safeguarding the amana of her soul. She understands that Allah did not create her to be diminished, silenced, or erased. He created her to know Him, to grow toward Him, and to live with dignity in His sight. And when a woman lives with this understanding, her faith becomes not a burden she carries, but a light that steadies her path.